hello again. Welcome into this edition of Strategies for Living here on 101.7 FM and 710 KEEL. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan, and smiling at the other end of the broadcast table, way on down yonder, PLPC Carla McCormick.
Hi, Dave.
How you doing, Carla?
I'm doing pretty good this sleepy, rainy Tuesday.
Yeah, you want to take a nap today, didn't
I
you?
know. I wanted to crawl under the table and take a nap, but nobody would let me.
Reuben took one for both of us. Yeah.
I wish.
You get you a nap today?
I did not. I had a lot going on today.
Yeah.
I had a lot of crock pot cooking and had somebody come and top off my Freon, and I had to wait around for that.
Oh, there you go. Just one of those days.
Right.
Welcome our ace of the airways, our producer, Rapid Reuben Wright.
Well, good evening, everybody.
And, guys, when I step back and I look, just so far this month, look at what we've covered. We've talked about acupuncture. We've talked about hope. We've talked about our sinuses.
Yes.
We've talked about the path to becoming a counselor. We learned all about essential oils, and it's still early in the month. This evening, I'm going to throw the book at you.
I'm going to duck.
We have reviewed a book or two so far on the program. I think we've done. Let's see if I can remember. We've done Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled.
Yes.
We've done Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements.
Yes.
And we've done Deepak Chopra's The Seven Spiritual Laws of Success.
Yes.
I think that's the books that we have presented so far.
With the ones without authors.
They're out. They have authors, but we didn't do author interviews.
Interview the authors.
We kind of reviewed the book, if
There
you will.
you go.
We're going to do that this evening. One of my very favorite people, Dr. Erin Yalom. He's a medical doctor. You may remember, I don't know, in your, Dr. Yalom wrote the absolute, the textbook on group therapy, used all over the country in graduate programs.
I'll probably have it on my bookshelf.
And
yes.
medical schools. And he, several years ago, wrote an incredible little book called The Gift of Therapy, subtitled An Open Letter to a New Generation of Therapists and Their Patients. And like all of his books, it was so successful, he came back and did a reprint, many reprints. One of the latest reprints has 20 additional pages, which include some of the things that we've been talking about since February, neuroscience
and
neurobiology and plasticity. So we're going to visit through the pages of The Gift of Therapy, you and I, with Dr. Erin Yalom this evening here on Strategies. And thank you for tuning in, folks. We are brought to you by CADA, the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse of Northwest Louisiana, and they've been helping individuals and families now for 60 years. We're also brought to you by Milestones Counseling Center, by Jerry Anderson State Farm Insurance, by Learning RX, by Highland Place Rehab and Nursing Center. We're brought to you by Resilient House and by Jacob's Well Inspirational Books and Gifts. When we come back, we're going to talk about how to remove the obstacles to growth. Ooh.
Deep.
We'll be back. And welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living here on 1017 FM and 710 KEEL. And PLPC Carla McCormick, marriage and family therapist David McMillan. Dr. Erin Yalam, medical doctor, he's the author of Love's Executioner, Mama and the Meaning of Life, Lying on the Couch, When Nietzsche Wept, as well as several classic textbooks on psychotherapy that include The Theory and Practice of Group Psychotherapy, considered the foremost work on group therapy. He's a professor emeritus of psychiatry at Stanford University, and he's still in practice, practicing between Palo Alto, California, and San Francisco, California. And this little book, I came across it years ago, and I probably shouldn't tell you this, but you're going to get it as a gift.
Oh,
Yeah.
that must mean you really like it.
I
because
really do like
you
it.
haven't given me any books yet.
Well, I gave you one or two. Now, one or two.
Okay,
Okay.
maybe. Not as a gift.
Okay.
I might have stolen them off your bookcase.
I got you. So, what I thought we would do, we may spend more than one program on this, not consecutive nights, but we just see where we go.
Okay.
And I thought we would. All of his chapters are brief ideas, but they all, and I totally agree with some of the endorsements on this book. Again, it's called the Gift of Therapy, and the Metro Times in Detroit said it's a call to arms for the couch, and that Yalam is a wizard for whom no curtain is left drawn.
Ooh.
Couldn't agree more. So, removing the obstacles to growth. Listen to this. Dr. Yalam says, when I was finding my way as a young psychotherapy student, the most useful book I read was Karen Horney's Neurosis and Human Growth. And the single most useful concept in that book was the notion that the human being has an inbuilt propensity towards self-realization if obstacles are removed. Horney believed the individual will develop into a mature, fully realized adult, just as an acorn will develop into an oak tree, just as an acorn develops into an oak. What a wonderfully liberating and clarifying image. It forever changed my approach to psychotherapy by offering a new vision of my work. My task was to remove obstacles blocking my patient's path. I didn't have to do the entire job. I didn't have to inspirit the patient with the desire to grow, with curiosity, will, zest for life, caring, loyalty, or any of the myriad of characteristics that make us fully human. No, what I had to do was to identify and remove obstacles. The rest would follow automatically, fueled by the self-actualizing forces within the patient. I remember a young widow with, as she put it, a failed heart, an inability to ever love again. It felt daunting to address the inability to love. I didn't know how to do that, but dedicating myself to identifying and uprooting her many blocks to loving, I could do that. I soon learned that love felt treasonous to her. To love another was to betray her dead husband. It felt to her like pounding the final nails in her husband's coffin. To love another as deeply as she did her husband, and she would settle for nothing less, meant that her love for her husband had been in some way insufficient or flawed. To love another would be self-destructive because loss and the searing pain of loss was inevitable. To love again felt irresponsible. She was evil and jinxed, and her kiss was the kiss of death. We worked hard for many months to identify all these obstacles to her loving another man. For months we wrestled with each irrational obstacle in turn. But once that was done, the patient's internal processes took over. She met a man, she fell in love, she married again. I didn't have to teach her to search, to give, to cherish, to love. I wouldn't have known how to do that. A few words about Karen Horney. Her name is unfamiliar to most young therapists because the shelf life of eminent theorists in our field has grown so short. I shall from time to time lapse into reminisce, but merely for the sake of paying homage, but to emphasize the point that our field has a long history of remarkably able contributors who have laid deep foundation for our therapy and work today. One uniquely American addition to psychodynamic theory is embodied in the Neo-Freudian movement, a group of clinicians and theorists who reacted against Freud's original focus on drive theory, that is, the notion that the developing individual is largely controlled by the unfolding and expression of inbuilt drives. Instead, the Neo-Freudians emphasized that we consider the vast influence of the interpersonal environment that envelops the individual and that throughout life shapes character structure. The best known interpersonal theorists, Harry Stack Sullivan, Eric Fromm, and Karen Horney, have been so deeply integrated and assimilated into our therapy language and practice that we are all, without knowing it, Neo-Freudians. One is reminded of Monsieur Jordan and Malher's Le Bourget, oh gosh, I can't say that, who, upon learning the definition of prose, exclaims with wonderment, to think that all my life I've been speaking prose without knowing it. Yeah. So, you know, that's a compelling thought that all of our job, the job of therapists, the job of clients, is to identify and remove the obstacles. That's kind of neat, isn't it?
So just to be clear for our listeners, what he's saying is that we all know what we need, and we all know our true path, or our where we're supposed to be going,
right.
You know, our
right.
path.
Right.
But sometimes we get in our own way, and I heard him say irrational thoughts.
Yeah.
So as people, we don't realize sometimes that our thoughts are irrational. And as a clinician, it's my job, it's your job to help them identify the thoughts that are irrational.
Right.
And help them remove those thoughts.
Absolutely.
But you told me one time that I can't work harder than my clients.
Yeah.
And
well, I enjoined you not. I gave you a suggestion that you might want to, if it ever feels like you do that, to pull back, because you don't work harder than your client's willing to work.
And I took that to heart, because, and what that said to me is that the clients know the work they have to do.
Absolutely.
I just have to let them do it.
Right.
And not try to do it for them.
The other thing that I find very compelling about this, and you know, I think we dealt with it with Meredith Stewart, the acupuncture lady. I think we touched on it last night with Mary Toma. We might have even touched on it with our friend that's talking Sinus 101. You know, the body is an incredibly self-healing mechanism, but sometimes there can be blocks to healing that get in the way. And so you've got to remove those blocks and let the body do its thing. So the compelling thing to me about what Dr. Yalam is saying, the mind is the same way. If we're to believe Karen Horney, if we're to believe Irvin Yalam, we're incredibly self-healing, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically too. However, there can be block, like this lady. I mean, the block was this thought that if I allow myself to love again, I'll somehow be nailing that last nail in my deceased husband's coffin.
Which was an irrational thought, but she didn't know that it was an irrational thought.
Right.
I mean, you know, there are books, and you hear people talk about their true north or whatever, and I've described this same scenario to my clients as their compass is broken. They you know, they know, everyone has, if we believe we have a destiny and we have our own true north, so to speak, but we can't get there with a broken compass.
Yeah, exactly. When we come back, we are going to dive in and talk about, well, the therapist and the patient. We would say the therapist and the client as fellow travelers.
That's the privilege.
Yeah, something to consider. We're talking about The Gift of Therapy, Dr. Erin Yalam's classic book here on Strategies for Living. And we'll be back. Much more to come, much more to consider. I think Ruben is inviting us out the back door.
We're doing a little chair dancing down
there
here.
you go. There you go. Welcome back. Welcome back into 1017 FM and 710 Keel. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. We're talking about a neat little book this evening, The Gift of Therapy, an open letter to a new generation of therapists and their patients, written by Dr. Erin Yalam. Carla and I are considering some of the brief little vignettes that the book is chock full of. One that I really like is it's titled Therapist and Patient as Fellow Travelers. So he says, André Malraux, the French novelist, described a country priest who had taken confession for many decades and summed up what he had learned about human nature in this way. First of all, people are much more unhappy than one thinks, and there's no such thing as a grown-up person. Everyone, and that includes therapists as well as patients, is destined to experience not only the exhilaration of life, but also its inevitable darkness, disillusionment, aging, illness, isolation, loss, meaninglessness, painful choices, and death. No one put things more starkly and more bleakly than the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. In early youth, as we contemplate our coming life, we are like children in a theater before the curtain's raised, sitting there in high spirits and eagerly waiting for the play to begin. It's a blessing that we do not know what is really going to happen. Could we foresee it? There are times when children might seem like condemned prisoners, condemned not to death, but to life, and as yet all unconscious of what their sentence means. Or again, we're like lambs in the field, disporting themselves under the eyes of the butcher, who picks out one first and then another for his prey. So it is that in our good days, we are all unconscious of the evil that fate may have presently in store for us: sickness, poverty, mutilation, loss of sight or reason. Though Schopenhauer's view is colored heavily by his own personal unhappiness, still, it's difficult to deny the inbuilt despair in the life of every self-conscious individual. My wife and I have sometimes amused ourselves by planning imaginary dinner parties for groups of people sharing similar propensities. For example, a party of monopolists, or flaming narcissists, or artful passive aggressors. We've known, or conversely, a happy party to which we invite only the truly happy people we've encountered. Though we've encountered no problems filling out all sorts of other whimsical tables, we've never been able to populate a full table for our happy people party. Each time we identify a few characterologically cheerful people and place them on a waiting list while we continue our search to complete the table, we find that one or another of our happy guests is eventually stricken by some major life adversity, often a severe illness or that of a child or a spouse. This tragic but realistic view of life has long influenced my relationship to those who seek my help. Though there are many phrases for the therapeutic relationship: patient therapist, client counselor, analysis, client facilitator, and the latest and by far most repulsive, user provider. None of these phrases accurately convey my sense of the therapeutic relationship. Instead, I prefer to think of my patients and myself as fellow travelers, a term that abolishes distinction between them, the afflicted, and us, the healers. During my training, I was often exposed to the idea of the fully analyzed therapist, but as I have progressed through life, formed intimate relationships with a good many of my therapist colleagues, met the senior figures in the field, been called upon to render help to my former therapist and teachers, and myself become a teacher and an elder, I've come to realize the mythic nature of the idea. We are all in this together, and there is no therapist and no person immune to the inherent tragedies of existence. One of my favorite tales of healing, found in Hermann Hesse's Magister Ludi, involves Joseph and Dion, two renowned healers who lived in biblical times. Though both were highly effective, they worked in different ways. The younger healer, Joseph, healed through quiet, inspired listening. Pilgrims trusted Joseph. Suffering and anxiety poured into his ears, vanished like water on the desert sand, and penitents left his presence emptied and calmed. On the other hand, Dion, the older healer, actively confronted those who sought his help. He divined their unconfessed sins. He was a great judge, chastiser, scolder, and rectifier, and he healed through active intervention. Treating the penitents as children, he gave advice, punished by assigning penance, ordered pilgrimages and marriages, and compelled enemies to make up. The two healers never met, and they worked as rivals for many years until Joseph grew spiritually ill, fell into dark despair, and was assailed with ideas of self-destruction. Unable to heal himself with his own therapeutic methods, he set out on a journey to the south to seek help from Dion. On his pilgrimage, Joseph rested one evening at an oasis where he fell into a conversation with an older traveler. When Joseph described the purpose and destination of his pilgrimage, The traveler offered himself as a guide to assist in the search for Dion. Later, in the midst of their journey together, the old traveler revealed his identity to Joseph. Mirabile dictu, he himself was Dion, the very man Joseph sought. Without hesitation, Dion invited his younger, despairing rival into his home, where they lived and worked together for many years. Dion first asked Joseph to be a servant. Later, he elevated him to a student, and finally, to full colleagueship. Years later, Dion fell ill, and his deathbed called his young colleague to him in order to hear a confession. He spoke of Joseph's earlier terrible illness and his journey to old Dion to plead for help. He spoke of how Joseph had felt it was a miracle that his fellow traveler and guide turned out to be Dion himself. Now that he was dying, the hour had come. Dion told Joseph to break his silence about the miracle. Dion confessed that at the time it seemed a miracle to him as well, for he too had fallen into despair. He too felt empty and spiritually dead, and unable to help himself, had set off on a journey to seek help. On the very night that they had met at the oasis, he was on a pilgrimage to the famous healer named Joseph. Hess's tale has always moved me in a preternatural way. It strikes me as a deeply illuminating statement about giving and receiving help, about honesty and duplicity, and about the relationship between healer and patient. The two men received powerful help, but in very different ways. The younger healer was nurtured, nursed, taught, mentored, and parented. The older healer, on the other hand, was helped through serving another, through obtaining a disciple from whom he received filial love, respect, and salve for his isolation. But now, reconsidering the story, I question whether these two wounded healers could not have been of even more service to one another. Perhaps they missed the opportunity for something deeper and more authentic and more powerfully mutative. Perhaps the real therapy occurred at the deathbed scene, when they moved into honesty with the revelation that they were fellow travelers, both simply human, all too human. The 20 years of secrecy, helpful as they were, may have obstructed and prevented a more profound kind of help. What might have happened if Dion's deathbed confession had occurred 20 years earlier, if healer and seeker had joined together in facing the questions that have no answers? All of this echoes Rilke's letters to a young poet, in which he advises, have patience with everything unresolved and try to love the questions themselves. I would add, try to love the questioners as well.
That I had never heard that story.
I had not either. But it so succinctly captures the beauty, and it's a duality, the beauty and the tragedy sometimes, the joy and the sorrow of what we deal with, whatever side of the couch we're on.
Well, and for me, I mean, whatever side of the couch we start on is not where we stay.
Yeah, you've talked about that.
It is, and it's, there are many times I leave a session filled up, perhaps more than I filled, and with this, profound sense of privilege. And I don't know how to describe it any other way, is that, for someone to trust me enough with their hopes and their dreams and their pain and their fears feels like such a privilege. And, and I don't take that lightly. I respect that privilege, and, and I think when I can be honest with my emotions and what I'm feeling, maybe I'm giving a little bit of that gift back, mirroring some of that back, because it is. I mean, we learn about that in school, and you learn about transference and counter-transference and all these, these words. But until you're in that room and until you're dealing with a client who's may have lost a child, and your heart breaks, and it doesn't break in a way that it does when it's a family member. The relationship is different, but the ache, the pain, that you watch your clients go through is just as real.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, most definitely. Another very short little chapter is entitled Engage the Patient. A great many of our patients have conflicts in the realm of intimacy and obtain help in therapy sheerly through experiencing an intimate relationship with the therapist. Some fear intimacy because they believe there is something basically unacceptable about them, something repugnant and unforgivable. Given this, the act of revealing oneself fully to another and still being accepted may be the major vehicle of therapeutic help. Others may avoid intimacy because of fears of exploitation, colonization, or abandonment. For them, too, the intimate and caring therapeutic relationship that does not result in the anticipated catastrophe becomes a corrective emotional experience. Hence, nothing takes precedence over the care and maintenance of my relationship to the patient, and I attend carefully to every nuance of how we regard each other. Does the patient seem distant today, competitive, inattentive to my comments? Does he make use of what I say in private but refuse to acknowledge my help openly? Is she overly respectful, ubiquitous, too rarely voicing any objection or disagreements, detached or suspicious? Do I enter his dreams or daydreams? What are the words of imaginary conversations with me? All these things I want to know and more. I never let an hour go by without checking into our relationship, sometimes with a simple statement like, how are you and I doing today? Or how are you experiencing the space between us today? Sometimes I ask the patient to project himself into the future. Imagine a half hour from now. You're on your drive home, looking back upon our session. How will you feel about you and me today? What will be the unspoken statements or unasked questions about our relationship today? Powerful stuff.
I love this book. Now, thank you for thinking of me. It's what we do every day. It's what we do every day. Engaging the patient is that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? Is building that trust and having them trust you enough to open their heart, open their
I
minds.
believe fully upward of 80% of the healing that can take place in the room, happens in the very unique and special relationship between therapist and client that is formed, in the therapy room.
There's a saying, what does it say? Secrets keep you sick. So when a client reveals their secrets, that's when the magic happens.
Yeah, absolutely. We're engaging the gift of therapy today, an open letter to a new generation of therapists and their patients. Dr. Erin Yalam's classic book. We'll be back. More strategies to come. Welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. 1017 FM, 710 KEEL. PLPC Carla McCormick, marriage and family therapist David McMillan, talking about Erin Yalam's wonderful little book, The Gift of Therapy. You can find it at your favorite bookseller. It's published by Harper Perennial. It's in soft cover, so it's not going to break the bank. And the new edition includes a PS, some extra interviews and features and additions that the author has made, including, because we promised at the beginning of the program, in the addition to the book, he adds some thoughts about neuroscience. And he says, neuroscience, give it a hug. Many therapists with little background in biological sciences are threatened by the recent astounding breakthrough in neuroscience research. I'll attempt to persuade you that the threat is entirely unwarranted. This text is not the place for a thorough technical presentation of the extraordinarily complex current state of neuroscience and mental illness, nor am I the person to present it, given the decades that separate me from my hard science education. Nonetheless, I'm sufficiently informed to discuss the relevance of current neuroscience research to the practice of psychotherapy. Too often, therapists struggle with the antiquated conundrum of nature or nurture. In other words, is mental illness prefigured in the genes, or is it the result of social psychological factors? The dazzling advances in neuroscience, too rapid and too complex for non-scientists to apprehend fully, have led many therapists to feel personally discomfited. Does the discovery of hundreds of new genes linked to mental disorders such as schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, sociopathy, addiction, and new ones reported almost every week suggest that the balance is shifting to nature rather than nurture? Will this shift ultimately make psychotherapy as we know it obsolete? This fear is much reinforced by the commonplace but entirely erroneous view that psychotherapy has something to offer disorders that have a psychological basis, while medication is the treatment of choice for biologically based disorders. But, in fact, new scientific advances are making it obvious that the question, nature versus nurture, is obsolete. Contemporary neuroscience answers the question with a resounding both. And no longer is this a fuzzy, speculative, soft answer. Instead, it's backed by the hardest scientific evidence. Genes alone provide only part of the reason for the development of mental illness. Do identical twins with identical genetic material develop the same mental disease? Yes, a great many do, but not all. If one twin develops schizophrenia, about 50% of the time, the other twin also develops the same condition. But if their genes are identical, why only 50%? Why not 100%? Why haven't the genes done their work in the non-afflicted 50%? The answer is to be found in the rapidly exploding field of epigenetics, a term that at this writing has over 4 million Google hits and growing every day. Epigenetics means beyond genetics. It addresses the many factors that alter gene activity without changing the DNA sequence, that is, without changing the biochemical structure of the gene. The basic sense of epigenetics is conveyed by its frequent use of such phrases as switching genes off and on, gene packaging, gene clothing. In other words, it is not only the molecular structure of the gene that is important, but also the factors that include gene expression. For example, the biochemical environment and all the factors influencing that environment. Similarly, go back to twin studies for a moment. Identical twins who had different lifestyles and had spent fewer years of their lives together differed from identical twins reared together, not only physiologically, but also anatomically and biochemically. Similarly, a variant of the MAO gene has been implicated in sociopathy, but it is only when individuals with the MAO gene also have a childhood marked by traumatic abuse that sociopathy develops. And what is the relevance of this for everyday psychotherapy? Well, it's now clear that our environment alters our biochemistry, which in turn controls the switching on and off of gene activity. The rate at which genes are expressed is greatly influenced by environmental events that occur during development, such as rearing practices, psychological and physical trauma, chronic life stressors, loss, grief, and early attachment experiences in both animals and humans. Rat pups who receive more licking and grooming from their mothers are physiologically more resilient to stress throughout their subsequent lives than those who do not benefit from such maternal support. Conversely, women who suffer sexual abuse as children are destined to secrete more stress hormones in response to stressors throughout their lives. But there's more. Neural and endocrine responses to stress are also influenced by ongoing experiences throughout the lifespan, and this can include psychotherapy, both cognitive behavioral therapy as well as the type of dynamic therapy discussed in this book. Psychotherapy influences metabolism and blood flow to specific regions of the brain, as indicated by brain imaging studies, as well as serotonin uptake and thyroid hormone levels. Moreover, the number of types of synaptic connections, the connections between neurons, are vastly changed during successful learning, a process known as learning-induced neuroplasticity, and this also includes the learning that occurs in psychotherapy.
Well, we read a study about that just a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
about a new study that talked about that psychotherapy actually changed the surface of the brain.
Yeah.
It actually changed the brain, and not just your thoughts, not just your mind. I mean, the physical structure of your brain changes.
You can see it.
Yes.
And you can see it as they use modern medical technology. The parts of the brain light up, and you can see that. You can experience that.
Well, so just like going to the gym and doing arm curls will build your biceps, when you're doing psychotherapy and you're working on changing your thought patterns and developing new ideas and changing the way your internal dialogue with yourself, you are changing your brain and you are growing your brain. They even talked about pruning, where you basically getting rid of the old thoughts, you're pruning those away, and you're growing the new thoughts and the new way to think about yourself and the world.
Yeah. To quote our life strategist last Friday, all God's children got issues, according to Dr. Ernie Calger.
Yeah.
Do we all need therapy then? Do all God's children need therapy?
I'm going to say this, but I'm biased. I think everyone could benefit from some form of therapy at different times in their lives. So I would say yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer, Carla, because it's not always. It's not all the time. When do you go to therapy? When do you seek therapy?
I guess my answer would be when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel like you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, when you can't find your way through your emotions or whatever you're dealing with, then it's time to get some help.
My answer would be when you need to. I mean, and what I mean by this is, and not all of us, but a lot of us are in tune with our body. We know when our body needs to go visit the doctor.
Right.
We know when we need to consult our family doctor or when we need to go to the emergency room. The mind is the same thing. And, we can, you go to therapy when you need to. And it's better if you do it like you would do physically. It's better to when you notice some symptoms that are concerning you, go to your family doctor or go to your, doc in the box. But don't wait until you have to go to ER,
Because you're having a panic attack?
Yeah, exactly. So, the gift of therapy. We'll come back and try to make sense of some of this. We're talking about it today here on Strategies for Living. Carla and I'll be right back.
I felt like drifting with the tumbleweeds.
It's kind of depressing.
It's kind of a precursor to, welcome back into 101.7 FM and 710 Keel. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. It's kind of a, I'm kind of wondering if he's got a little psychic ability, that Reuben Wright.
Where are you going next?
Yeah, well, we're talking about The Gift of Therapy, the book by Dr. Erin Yalaom tonight. We just barely have scratched the surface of it, but to conclude, some of the chapters are kind of surprising. Here's a very short one called "Talk About Death." The fear of death always percolates beneath the surface. It haunts us throughout life, and we erect defenses, many based on denial, to help cope with the awareness of death. But we cannot keep it out of the mind. It spills over into our fantasies and dreams. It bursts loose in every nightmare. When we were children, we were preoccupied with death, and one of our major developmental tasks has been to cope with the fear of obliteration. Death is a visitor in every course of therapy. To ignore its presence gives the message that it is too terrible to discuss. Yet, most therapists avoid direct discussion of death. Why? Some therapists avoid it because they don't know what to do with death. What's the point, they say? Let's get back to the neurotic process, something we can do something about. Other therapists question the relevance of death to the therapy process and follow the counsel of the great Adolf Meyer, who advised not scratching where it doesn't itch. Still others decline to bring up the subject that inspires great anxiety in an already anxious patient and in the therapist as well. Yet, there are several good reasons we should confront death in the course of therapy. First, keep in mind that therapy is a deep and comprehensive exploration into the course and meaning of one's life. Given the centrality of death in our existence, given that life and death are interdependent, how can we possibly ignore it? From the beginning of written thought, humans have realized that everything fades, and we fear the fading, and that we must find a way to live despite the fear and the fading. Psychotherapists cannot not afford to ignore the many great thinkers who have concluded that learning to live well is to learn to die well.
Let's talk about it. Talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah. Change is a part of life, isn't it? It's inevitable.
What does M. Scott Peck say? Life is difficult.
Life is difficult.
I say life is difficult, but people are good.
Yeah. Folks, thank you for tuning into Strategies for Living. We have been brought to you by CADA, by Jerry Anderson State Farm, by Milestones Counseling Center, by Learning RX, by Highland Place Rehab and Nursing, by Resilient House, and by Jacob's Well Inspirational Books and Gifts. If today were the last day of your life, you only had one more phone call you could make, who would you call? What would you say? Why are you waiting? Make the call. For Reuben Wright, for PLPC Carla McCormick, marriage and family therapist David McMillan, see you next time on Strategies for Living.